This is a fun effect. Hey, this is Steve from Unexplored Films, and I'm back with another filmmaking tutorial. And I wanted to think of an effect that people could try in their garden or just outside their front door if they're in quarantine. And this was a really fun one to have a go at, the superhero landing effect. This is basically meant to look like something out of a big budget Hollywood movie, and although it looks like it's been filmed by someone else, the beauty of this effect is that it can be done completely solo, which is how I attempted it. So for this you'll need a camera and a tripod, and it helps if you have a monitor as well. I use the external monitor to help line myself up in the shot, and it helps to use the widest lens you've got for this. I shot in 4K resolution, planning on cropping it down later, and a wide angle will give you a lot of help. Also bearing in mind that if you're going to land basically at knee height, then you might want to set the camera up lower than head height, so I set it up at what my head height would be when I was kneeling. The first thing you need to do is jump and land in your best superhero pose. So you might want to do this a bunch of different times and get a take that you're happy with. I did this a couple of different times and basically just tried to land in an epic superhero style posture with varying degrees of success, and I would also definitely recommend that you stretch before doing this because I did not, and I was feeling it the next day. So once you've got a take that you're happy with of landing like a superhero where the camera isn't moving and is fixed in a relatively wide field of view, next, is there anything you can affect within the frame that will make it look like it has been jolted or moved when you landed? Now some of these can be added later of course, but I think I'm from the special effects school of if you can do it in camera, then do it in camera. Now I tried this at the bottom of the garden with a couple of things. There was a bird feeder that I made fall off the little shed, and same with a hanging basket which I made fall down, and then I tipped over the table at the bottom of the garden and I threw some branches down onto the ground as if those had been knocked off. These were all just to give me options in the edit later, and my plan would be to cut these elements out and stick them back over the master shot to make it look like it had all happened at the same time. But bear in mind, if it's a sunny day, you may get shadows changing, so you might want to be really quick doing this as soon as you've got your favourite landing take. Once you've done all the practical effects, now you can move the camera, but only slightly. I've seen this effect done by others by them just landing in the frame, but the real icing on the cake with this is to add a camera move. Now I did a simple tilt down. Start with the camera in the position where it's been for everything else, and do a quick tilt up to the sky and leave it there for 10 seconds. This means that later you can reverse the tilt up and it becomes a tilt down, and it ends up in exactly the right place to match with the clip of you landing. And that's everything you need to film, and now it's time to head into editing. Next we head into After Effects with your favourite superhero landing take, and even though they're basically finishing touches, I was quite eager to see if the practical effects would work, so I instantly chopped those out using the mask tool and added them back in over the main take of me landing. And I had to feather the edges a bit to disguise the joins, especially around where the shadows had changed, but I was pleased that this showed that this effect would actually work. When you film any objects dropping or tipping over, it's a good idea to wait about 10 seconds before and after you do this, otherwise you may run out of time to use them in the footage. Now what I hadn't realised was that when I dropped the branches in, they actually went past the table, which was from a different take, so I had to actually make some smaller masks to have the falling branches moving past the fallen table. If I'd thought about this more, I would have probably dropped them in a different part of the screen, but this is why we experiment. I also realised that when I exit frame, I'm actually crossing both the table and the branches that are now lying on the floor, neither of which were there when I did the run, so I had to create another mask around my leg so that I move smoothly in front of those objects that weren't actually there. Once you're happy with how everything in the static shot looks, now it's time to find that tilt up that you did, reverse it and add it to the front of your timeline. This should now look like a tilt down and should line up exactly with everything else you've already edited. By extending the take of the hero landing backwards over the tilt up, you can see what's about to happen here. Once we cut out the hero character, it's going to look like he's falling through the air. Now I've seen others do this just by using a freeze frame and cutting that out, but for extra points try and cut out as many frames as you can of you performing the jump. It's going to take longer, but it's going to look better. And as you can see, as soon as you put that mask over the tilt, the fact that the figure is moving really sells that what you're seeing is a real jump and not just a still being keyframed around. So now we have our cutout figure over the tilt. The next thing I realized was that the tilt and the static shot didn't quite match, again because the shadows had changed. So I actually cut out a bit more of the background of the static clip, which is what of course we want it to end up looking like, and blurred it and keyframed this in to the last few frames of the tilt down. This meant that it looks less like a jump cut when the figure lands. If I was going to do this again, I would have probably chosen an overcast day because it would have been much less trouble, but it was fine in the end. Next, you can keyframe the position and the scale of your figure flying through the air to make them start off at a much smaller size. At this point, you can turn it into a freeze frame if the footage isn't long enough, and when it's a small figure, it's fine. But I just like the fact that when the figure gets big enough to see, you can actually see the figure moving. So I reduced the scale of the figure right down to about 0, and also added some color correction for when he was above the trees and was in direct sunlight before he lands in the shadowy patch. Okay, now it's time to have some fun with adding some digital embellishments to make this look even more dramatic. Now, I found a couple of good downloadable graphics on footagecrate.com, which you can sign up to for free and download some of these effects. So from Footage Crate, I used one called Ground Impact, and I think I used one called Shockwave as well, and I just tried to blend them in with the landing as best I could. I also used a few of the action essentials from Video Copilot, which I've had on my drive for years and are very, very good. So I often see these just slapped onto the top without any attempt to sort of blend them with their surroundings. I think the trick here is to go for subtlety and bring the opacity down and try your best to blend it with the existing ground. Now, I did this on grass. It would probably be different if you did it on tarmac. I added a subtle dust cloud from Action Essentials and that helped as well, and those started to make the impact really effective. I soon realized that because of all the ground cracks and all the effects around the feet, I would actually have to create a mask of the knees and the hand and the foot anyway, so I did all of that. I also realized that I could make the glass of the shed door shatter using Action Essentials glass as well. It looked a little bit slow motion at first and a little bit fake. It didn't look fast enough, so I doubled the speed and suddenly it looked a lot more effective. Next, I used another effect from Footage Crate called Blue Energy Ball and added that to the sky because I thought, well, this character needs to come from somewhere, and it just looked a little more dramatic using the screen mode instead of normal. So I added this above the image of the sky before the tilt down, and I also did some color correcting to match every time the lightning struck in the effect. I added a flash to the overall image to show that it was being affected by the brightness of the lightning as well. The next stage was to pre-compose this so that it appears as one single timeline, and to actually add some artificial camera movement, because this is going to really sell that all of this happened in one take. And I deliberately shot this on a wide lens because I knew I was going to crop in and move around artificially later anyway. So I did that and then used the wiggle expression tool to add some artificial camera movement to the whole thing, and after a bit of trial and error I found an amount of movement that I was happy with. I also added some manual camera moves to make it look a bit more filmed, such as a big camera shake when the character lands, and also a bit of panning around at the end. So we're getting close to a finished effect now, and the next step was some color correction to liven up the flat looking footage. I'd shot this in S-Log because it was quite bright outside and I wanted control over the highlights and the shadows, and pretty soon I was happy with how that looked. It was also at this point that I decided to delay the hanging basket falling until the very end, as it added a bit of a comic final beat when the camera pans back to the scene that has been destroyed. And the final stage, which I really can't emphasize enough, is sound design. So much of this effect works because of sound design. Now, I started with the original audio that I had just recorded in camera, so the sound of my footsteps and all the general ambience and the practical things falling over, like the table and the hanging basket and the bird feeder, those were all real. Next, I started adding some much more Hollywood over-the-top sound effects, so we had some lightning happening in the sky, some dramatic whooshes, and then obviously a huge bang when I land, and then there were some more subtle noises like the glass breaking and the dust settling, and just general things to sound like something big and loud had happened. And my favourite is the burglar alarm, which I deliberately added to make it sound like it was actually enough to set off a nearby alarm, and I was really pleased with how it turned out. And so that's pretty much it. That is how you can film and edit this effect entirely on your own and make it look like you've done an epic superhero landing. So guys, I hope you enjoyed that. Please give it a go and tell me what you think, and please hit that subscribe button if you would like to see more of these. I've been Steve from Unexplored Films, and I will see you next time.